Okay, so it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Bruce Tharp this morning, actually this afternoon. I've done that twice now. It is actually afternoon here as well. So Bruce is believed to be the first industrial designer to receive a PhD in anthropology at the University of Chicago in 1998, where he began researching material cultures of Indiana's Old Order Amish, focusing on the production and consumption of value. He first earned a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Bucknell University and a master's degree in industrial design from the Pratt Institute. In between his schooling, he served as a US Army's nuclear officer in Germany. After researching the future of work and the workplace for the Horwath Inc.'s design research think tank, the Ideation Group, he began his teaching career. Over the last 20 years, he's been a tenured professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and currently the University of Michigan's Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design. His and Stephanie's award-winning design studio has exhibited internationally, licensed designs for local and global companies, and self-produced commercial, experimental, and discursive projects. They are also co-authors of Discursive Design, Critical, Speculative, and Alternative Things. I'm personally really excited to hear Bruce's perspectives on discursive design. My background is in more speculative ways of approaching design and research through design. So I'm personally excited for this. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Bruce.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I like being an evangelist for discursive design and all things related to that. So thank you for having me here. And Sam had kind of cued me in a little bit. We have a kind of a wide audience, probably some who are familiar with this type of work, some who are not familiar with it, some who are excited about it, maybe like Sam, and others who are maybe more skeptical about it. So I'm trying to hit kind of a middle ground here, and hopefully in the questions, the Q&A at the end, we can dig deeper if we didn't get sort of deep enough in the presentation. So. Let me start my timer here, just for my own edification here. Okay. Oops, there we go. So yeah, as Sam mentioned, this is my background. I won't go through it again. I think this is my 21st year teaching at 3 different types of institutions. The School of Art Institute of Chicago is an arts institution very much that sort of invited design along. I say it's like design was invited to arts party in there, and then 2 other universities, and Penny W. Stamps right now is sort of a major research university here in the United States, with like 40,000 students or something like that, so very large. My research backgrounds, starting like right in 1998, is with design research itself in the United States. Design research wasn't really a thing. It had sort of picked up a little bit more in Europe, let's say in the 1980s or so, but there wasn't much of a push in the United States. So with studying anthropology, this is sort of a natural sort of way to move into research. And right around the time I started teaching in 2005, and that's when I started to have to think a little bit more about discursive design and this space, because I was responsible for talking to students, and I had students that were kind of confused about things. So my research began in 2005 on discursive design. And then actually, shortly after I started teaching, the reality of my meager paycheck kicked in, and I started to do more work in design entrepreneurship. And this was actually around the time where crowdfunding like Kickstarter was just sort of just getting going, and some designers were starting to really use that space, and also licensing, how a designer might take their design idea and find a manufacturer and then receive royalties from this process. So I was involved in that kind of work for a while. And then most recently, this area that I guess I'm calling it design energetics. And it is, I guess it's acknowledging that if we look at quantum physics and we acknowledge that that everything is just energy, matter is just congealed energy, what are the implications for that for designers, people who try and create positive experiences from this stuff when they themselves are just energy, the stuff around them are energy, and the people we are affected by other energies, which are often really subtle and difficult to measure. So it's more of a theoretical look right now because a lot of it is it's kind of difficult to kind of measure and get our hand on. But anyway, that's also what I've been working on. As Sam mentioned, a lot of the work in discursive design culminated with the book Discursive Design: Critical, Speculative, and Alternative Things. And this is something that it's actually in your library. I looked to see if the digital version was there, and you just have a physical copy there. And there's also actually if anyone's interested in Chinese, there are two Chinese versions. One I think you get sort of in Taiwan, and the other one in mainland China. So I'm not exactly sure, the tension between why there are two versions there. But yeah, so a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today, or the work that I'm going to talk about today, is coming from our research in this space, and I include my wife Stephanie Tharp, who has a similar background to myself, and she also teaches at the Stamp School of Design, so I'm kind of representing both of our perspectives today. So I'd like this. I'm happy to take questions at any point. I'll probably have to lean on Sam because you're all very tiny, so I can't see your hands raised necessarily or anything like that. But I'm happy to stop at any point and address a question if need be. And Sam did send me a few questions right before this talk that I included at the end, and I haven't really looked over them. I just very briefly read them, so I'll have a chance to address those. I think we should have enough time. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is just basically two things. Is one, I want to introduce this four-field approach to design, and I had sent out a copy of a chapter of our book which deals with this. So I won't deal too much with this topic, but I will, understanding that not everyone would have the time or inclination necessarily to read the chapter, that I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to, in sort of part two there, I'm going to dig just a little bit deeper into discursive design, and mostly talk about the domains of discursive design. And this is where, in talking with Sam beforehand, that as most of you, I understand, are graduate students, and this is where I think it can be valuable to you. I've always said that if you're dealing with human beings, there's something within discursive design that can help you do the work that you do. So hopefully we'll be able to open the space up a little bit, and you might be able to find where find something that might be useful for you in this. So, okay. So the four-field approach to design. So I want to mention that I'm presenting this work from the perspective of product design. That's my background, my wife Stephanie's background, product industrial design. But what we're talking about is really applicable to all forms of design that are out there: graphic, visual communication, architecture, and even art practices as well. So while the examples and things I'll be kind of focusing are more product designy, you can probably see where they begin to connect. Okay, and so yes, so this is the product design thing. This is the type of thing that we normally do: watches, toys, shoes, automotive, electronics, furniture, that type of stuff. So there's really a broad range, and traditionally these are all very commercially driven. And so the backgrounds of Stephanie and myself, so I went to Pratt Institute, and Stephanie was at Rhode Island School of Design, and we both had engineering backgrounds, which is actually why we chose these schools, because they were kind of at the other end of the scope. We both did a lot of work that was probably considered conceptual or critical a critical design type. And in fact, if you tried to do some commercial work, I know especially actually at RISD, it was kind of looked down on, and definitely at Pratt to the same extent. So there was really a kind of bias away from more commercial design work, which is the exact opposite of what we had sort of experienced with our design backgrounds and our other backgrounds, which were more commercial. So we had this dilemma where we have students who are wanting to understand where they fit in all of this, and ourselves as well as sort of as professors, sort of kind of wondering about where this conceptual stuff might begin to fit in with all of this. So we started this process. We looked at all these types of design to try and make sense of it. So it's a kind of a survey of it. And then we went and basically created different buckets and to kind of see if we could make sense of the mess of design. And one of the problems too also is, this is an ever-growing list of types of design out there. So we knew that was a little bit of a problem too. So we ended up sort of simplifying this process with these 4 buckets: commercial, responsible, experimental, and discursive, that house these things. And so commercial design is pretty obvious. It's, the profit-driven, it's design that's oriented to the marketplace. This is like 90% or more of all design practice today. It's something we all kind of understand this approach. Now, responsible design is defined as sort of driven towards a notion of service. It's sort of, we say, like serving the underserved. So, people who might be neglected in the marketplace for some reason or otherwise. And it also takes on sort of a philanthropic or an altruistic kind of perspective. And then experimental design. So this is driven by, this a notion or a drive of inquiry. And this is the kind of design that explores questions, and it looks at materials, processes, technologies, like the kind of thing the MIT lab does a lot of, but also aesthetics itself and even concepts. So we can see this type of work, experimental design, sort of being kind of more, can be more sciencey and experimental, and more rational in that way, but also dealing with much more subjective and conceptual type of things too. And then the 4th area is discursive design, and it is, the term discursive comes from the word discourse, and this is really where there's kind of an exchange of substantive ideas. And where discourse is deliberately embedded and gendered, embodied into an object. And the goal is to get people to reflect on something. So it's very much an intellectual type of work versus something that's instrumental and utilitarian. So it's really about the mind, affecting the mind, at least at the first level. And this is also where design rubs up against art probably the most. And this is, why, the title of this is not, not just for galleries anymore, because that's kind of where it started. So a lot of the goals of art are of forms of conceptual art are really can be the same as discursive design, which is why there's, it's very closely related, but some important distinctions that a lot of people who work in this space from the design side sort of feel. So I'll just go through some examples relatively quickly of each of those. This is pretty obvious. The kind of electronics is pretty common when we think of, commercial design as, something is, Apple, the first $1 trillion company out there. Then also, I like to include an example like this also. This is actually a very, a couple $100 million with this chair in sales of this chair, maybe several hundred million. I'm not quite sure. It's tough to get those kind of numbers, but it's a big seller. This is for, Cartel, which is a big furniture manufacturer. And here it's definitely successful commercially, but there's also this, there's also a sort of some concept in here. This is the ghost of these Louis the 14th, I think, chairs, and it's this clear polycarbonate plastic, that kind of thing. So this commercial stuff isn't just all, it just isn't all numbers, but it's fundamentally, if it wasn't making money, well, that's it probably wouldn't be in existence or existence much longer. Okay, responsible design. This is actually a prototype. I believe there's more refined version out now. I've seen some online, but they seem to be the ones that I saw online were more like renderings of it. But this glove is there's an alphabet for people who are deaf and blind. It's called LORM, LORM. And it's basically different points on the hand and on the back of the hand. And that's how you communicate. And, imagine being both, blind and deaf and how you might communicate. So this is a glove that really, the idea is that you can spell things out on one side and you send messages essentially on one side and then receive them on the other side. Okay, so and this is a relatively small market, so it's generally ignored by by in the marketplace by other companies, and this is kind of an old sort of classic product in this category. Was called the $100 laptop. Now it's one laptop per child, and it was on a mission and quote to create educational opportunities for the world's poorest children by ensuring each child has a rugged, low-cost, low-power, connected laptop with content and software designed for collaborative, joyful, and self-empowered learning. So this is a nonprofit, and they were really focused on maximizing, the kind of the positive impact on children's life. And this is a project that came out of the MIT Media Lab, and there's obviously some other critiques about this as well, but really their intent was to be able to level the digital divide. And so with experimental design, this is actually an MIT project as well. This is a David Mellis from the MIT Media Lab. He did this, it's called the DIY cell phone. And this is exploration into the possibilities for an individual to construct and customize their own cell phone. So he's looking at digital fabrication and open source hardware for for the customization of a personal cell phone. And this is actually, I think this is the phone that David himself had and carried around for over 2 years. He used this phone. So very much experimenting with these, with this digital fabrication and also customization. This is another project. It's a 3D printed chair, and it has kind of a flexible material. And depending on the shape, it flexes in different ways. So Lillian Van Dahl did this project, and she said, I was testing the flexibility and stiffness you get from one material, this flexible material, by 3D printing various structures. So it's very much looking at biomaterials and also form and how that relates to comfort. So this is, a pretty inefficient way to make a chair. So it's really not a commercial endeavor, but really experimentation with, technology, materials, and also form a little bit. And moving on to discursive design. So this is sort of one of the early classic projects, and this is done by IDEO and Crispin Jones in London, their office. This is when the term interaction design had just been kind of coined, and this is in the early 2000s. And they were doing this project. They were looking at mobile phones were just sort of hitting the scene, and they were looking at ways or different forms of phones that probe how we use our phones in social spaces. And probably most of you have always had mobile phones in your life. For those of us who were alive before we had mobile phones, it was this sort of very interesting disruption that we had, where people were talking on their phones and people actually didn't like it. In fact, there was a UK study that was done, and it was about the top 10 least favorite things of people in the UK, and cell phones were among the top 10, and they were right alongside nuclear weapons and landmines, which is kind of funny to think about. But anyway, so this is a project that was really looking at the social use of phones. And here in the back guy, you see the guy in the back, and he's got a kind of a jammer. So the guy in the blue shirt in the front, he's talking too loudly on his phone, and these other people have the ability to kind of disrupt his phone call, and it kind of is a signal to him that he's talking too loud. And this is one of I think 5 different types of phones that they had developed. So this is a big firm, IDEO, working on this industrial design, and I would say design in general, international consultancy. And these were working prototypes and never intended for production. And this is the Museum of the Future. So this is a project in the United Arab Emirates, and it was an annual exhibition, and it's really focused on the role of future technology. In their words, it highlights prototypes of prospective services that could be developed by the governments of tomorrow. And so each year since 2014, they would take on sort of different sectors like government services, healthcare, climate change, food security, AI, that type of thing. And even, I think, maybe it's 3 years ago, it's now an actual museum, like an incredible sort of work of architecture, that it's a permanent museum right now to the future. So, so anyway, so this is an idea of like, getting the public in essence to be exposed to some of these things and to reflect. And the government, sees the investment in this because it helps them to sort of, one, understand maybe what people want, and also maybe some resistance to certain things that are coming their way technically. Okay, so that's the sort of 4-field approach. And if we reflect back on some of those examples, what we have with some of those examples are essentially 4 different mobile electronic communication devices, but with 4 different dominant rationales or motivations for why they exist. So this 4-field approach, we look at it, it's not about what we design, like toys, shoes, car, furniture, consumer electronics, things that were kind of typically the way we think of those. And it's not about how we design, participatory design, inclusive, universal, sustainable, emotional design, but it's really focused on this, like why we design as designers. Why are we doing? What's the dominant motivation for that? Is it profit, service, inquiry, or reflection? And so in a way, it's it's an expanded understanding of design, rather than kind of a narrow sense that it's just commercial. It also gives a sort of some structure to this large and expanding field of design. And it was really created to help our students, to actually do design and to help them find their place in it. So it can be more of a generative tool for designers, but it also gives language to help us have more efficient and effective conversations, like especially when a group of people are working on a design project and they might have different motivations, and it gives a little bit of language to have discussions about. So any questions about sort of that 4-field approach as a sort of a basic foundation for design?
Hi, thank you so much, Juan, just for being here and sharing with us. I guess for me, I was talking to Ram Makari, who I understand he said he did some kind of design thing at your house. For me, I'm coming from the more than human perspective, the post-humanist, which of course is, again, as you mentioned, the part of this branching that happens in design into all these different disciplines. And so when I see your list of 4, of course, I immediately go to, well, heck, there's like overlap between all of those. So you've made these categories, but of course, they're all integrated in with each other. So how does this operate when you think about, experimental service-based applications, or, if the design intent is to improve life for marginalized folks, but you're in this experimental space, like, of course, it's a big tangly mess. So how do you deal with the tangle when we have these 4 categories?
Okay, good. Thank you. That is probably the number one question that we get about this. And in fact, I've even included this slide, expecting that this might happen.
Thumbs up, yeah.
We address this as sort of hybridity, right? So the idea is that any sort of framework or system or typology, taxonomy, they're never perfectly clean. And so this is a system that we say it's intended to simplify sort of the reality of the world, rather than, I'm sorry, it's not intended to simplify the reality of the world, but basically how do we begin to deal with the inescapable complexity of it? So we think of this as, how do we begin to start conversations rather than end conversations with this framework? So one of the things that we have is it's basically just kind of a way to graph and think about these, how these all these potentially could be present, and even to what degree. So if we look at David Mellis's phone here, you know, we can begin to think about it as really a fully experimental project, but there is sort of this discursive aspect of it. And, you know, we can think of none or high, medium, and low. And often we'll give, you know, students, you know, this as a handout to begin to work and think through their projects. And this is especially helpful also with groups, when you have groups working on a design together. We find all the time that these are conflicting motivations. So the question is, how do we begin? So in a way, it's you can start a conversation. Let's get this all out on the table. And what are you looking for? What are you looking for? And how might we bring them together? And they also, you know, we can begin to, again, start a conversation about, well, what does responsibility actually, you know, mean? Is this more social responsible? Is it sort of environmentally responsible? And how might we begin to account for that? So in a way, it's also very much a discursive tool in itself. But you're absolutely right that these things are overlapping, and it's just a tool that might help you to expand the possibility, because that's the thing that we were mostly hit with, is sort of a very limited idea of this. So it was helped to open up the space for people, but also allowed them to think about, you know, quality and quantity of emphasis or interest in working in those different areas. So so I hope that addressed your question to some extent. Okay, I see a hand up. I'm thinking maybe it's a thumbs up. I hope it's a thumbs up and not a thumbs down.
It was a thumbs up as well.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Oh, is that somebody else doing the thumbs up?
I give it thumbs up.
Right,
Right, it's a lot of hands in the air.
Okay,
Sorry.
great, yeah. So, okay, is it okay?
Yeah.
Or is somebody else? Okay. Hey, Bruce, thanks. That's really interesting. I actually, I mean, I appreciate anything that that brings categories to kind of understand things differently. That's the notion of the discursive component. Can you go back one slide? Okay. So it's really interesting. I see what you're doing. I think it is a useful tool, but if I thought about this, I would not say commercial, none, responsible, none at all. I mean, it looks like it's using natural ingredients, for example, that has an access to responsibility. Yes, it's definitely experimental. And if you, and the first time you mentioned commercial, I just wondered, okay, commercial is, we say profit, and like there's a whole part of the word commercial and profit, capitalism, that's just dirty words, right? However, you know, the commercial notion, I wonder, should it be called commercial? I mean, I have lots of thoughts about this, but in order to share things between more than a small lab at MIT, which is, by the way, highly resourced with a lot of money paid for by, I don't know who pays for these things, but that's also a capitalist institution. So is it actually the object, or is it the institution in which it exists? And with regard to commercialism, there's all these kind of things going on with, like, you know, micro investment, like teeny things that happen in many places that are actually looking to share things between people. And so I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that I find that there's a kind of a little bit of rigidity, but again, I think that the kind of concepts of doing these things are super interesting. And I like that the students can, but I find that they're a little, even with commercial and profit, every single one of these needs resources. Should it be called profit, or should it be called resources? Because we have different ways, and everybody needs resources. First of all, you need to breathe the air. Is there enough oxygen there? Like, there's lots of different kinds of resources, but because what I'm worried about is the kind of binarisms. And because, like, when I think of commercial too, right away I have a bad taste in my mouth. By the way, I do like buying like cute shoes. I have to say, like, you know that there's this whole bunch of pieces of this commercial, and I love things that I find beautiful for whatever reason other people might not. So it's a big thing to me. I have an aesthetic draw that's stronger than my capacity to say I really should save some money. You know, so I mean, this is just being in the world and appreciating certain things. So I guess I don't think there's a real answer to this, and it's not an actual critique. I think it's about the nuances and the particularity of each of these. And by the way, fantastic examples. These are really great examples. And the thing with cell phone, like that's gone. That age where people were walking by and you thought, are they mad? They're just talking out loud. Well, nobody thinks anything about that anymore.
Talking to yourself is so normal now.
Yeah, like talking to yourself, you don't even have to have a cell phone, you can do it and nobody looks, but before, you know, like it was really annoying to have the audio space disrupted in that way. And there's audio spaces disrupted in lots of ways. So anyway, I don't know, but I'm not meaning to rant. And
But can I say what I like about it? Can I retaliate? Not retaliate.
yeah, retaliate.
Because I think what I'm hearing though
Of
is
course.
that are you enjoying this? This is really for you. I mean, it's for us too. Is that this is the jumping off, like for people that are entering into a design space, it's kind of like, which continent am I on?
Right.
And then how do I understand all the populations that live here? How do I understand the terrain? But I think if I'm understanding correctly, what you're managing is like people that are like, I'm on planet Earth of design and it's everything. And this is kind of like, okay, like how do we start to kind of give, this is how we define a mountain. You know, is that where you're going with this more? It's like a place that you begin to understand and then you can kind of enter into the complexity that we exist in academia in.
Absolutely. And the other part too about this is like we design this as a tool for designers, more so than for someone who might be analyzing this. So the idea is, you know, your own intentions, and it helps you get straight on those intentions so you can navigate the very difficult, the thousands of design decisions that you make, because you're getting clear on what the fundamental thing that I'm going after. And I would say, I completely agree with the issue, because I deal with artists all the time who say, oh, design just about money. And like, as art isn't a completely monetized way of practice. So I believe there, but the idea of commerce being about profit, that I'm into this, like David, in talking to him, he's not interested in any way about making money from this object. But you're right in that it is vague enough and potentially aggravating enough that you can begin to unpack and have some conversations about what we mean with these four general buckets. I say we really look at this being as discursive, and we have found that a lot that this is really helpful for people like I've taught it to entry-level undergraduate, you know, first-year undergraduates, and also first-year graduate students, mostly as an expansive tool to begin to think more broadly than this sort of narrow sort of commercial design space that design is usually associated with. So thank you. I'm going to move on. So we have time.
Yes.
We got one more question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm also from the same lab with Ron Wakari. That's about More Than Human. So I'm being brainwashed by More Than Human these days. And I also went to RISD for undergrad.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, and so one thing when there's a category, I always want to find something that's outside of the category.
Yeah.
So one thing I was thinking, that if you want to broaden the definition of design to carving a stone into a sphere, then that's kind of like, for example, I guess before modernity, you're kind of shaping tools to survive. And I feel like then it feels like it doesn't belong to any of the four categories, and kind of highlighting that you're designing because you have to, or you're designing because all the more than human influences around you. So that's the first thought. And then the second thought is, I read the chapter 4 that you shared, and it looks like there's some like brief mentioning of copycats in Asia. And then you also referenced a book about the Chinese design revolution. I haven't read it, but I feel like there's some underlying thoughts about it, and I wonder if there are any more towards it. And having studied as an artist, I actually can relate to, I know that Jerry Saltz has a practice that he said modern art is very expensive. So I'm paying $150 something to a copycat that perfectly replicates the original. So that's I'm kind of drawing the connection to copycats in design and copycats in fine arts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the as a sort of a framing of this tool is that it's more about professional design practice. Some of the rub is, yeah, when you get into DIY, like the practice of design, right? I might be designing for myself in a way that has something that maybe it could be commercialized, but it's not intended that way. So this is very much sort of within a professional paradigm as opposed to maybe DIY, some other things. Also, I found with artists as well working this space that for them, another primary motivation is really self-edification, or it's more self-oriented. So in thinking about this with artists themselves, that we found that there is kind of a more of a fifth, motivation that is sort of primary for them. So and I actually I'm not quite sure how to address the copycat thing with you. So I'd like to hold off on that. Maybe at the end we can get back to the to what you're getting at with the copycat a little bit. So okay, so so just to kind of clarify, this can help us recognize and perhaps elevate some non-commercial sort of agendas. It can align sort of like-minded practitioners. And again, a lot of times from students presenting this, we get this idea of like, oh, thanks for helping me sort of, figure out, and I wish I would have, sort of, known about something like this, or been presented with this beforehand to sort of open my mind up a little bit, because they felt a little bit confined within, sort of a commercial paradigm. You can also, create a community practice, and it provides some common language to help establish sort of the goals of the work. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Now, if we look at the discursive design in some of the domains, so we're digging in a little bit more, and this is our kind of working definition for discursive design. And I'll just let you kind of read that. So it's really about these substantive topics of psychological, sociological, and ideological import. And these ideas, they're considered discourse, and therefore this is a kind of a form of discourse through design. So discourses are embodied and carried through the designs themselves. So discourse is something that, of course, has been discussed quite a bit, mostly associated with like Foucault, and so we draw a little bit from Foucault in this way, and this idea of systems of thought or knowledge. So that's kind of how we're defining what a discourse is. But the idea that there's a little bit more substance to it. That's why this notion of substantive is in this definition, and also, it's capable of sustaining a complex of competing perspectives and values. So this is kind of contestable kind of stuff, but part of the systems of thought or knowledge. It's also, and this is actually Foucault, what was sort of more revolutionary for Foucault. If we begin to think about he deals with words. So his proposition that, that physical things can be discourses too, is a little bit more revolutionary for him, but makes, obviously sense for us. And because we can use these artifacts, these products, systems, services, spaces, interactions, they're all included with this idea of artifacts. And these are, kind of what we can use instead of words, or sort of in addition or along with words, with language. Oops, let me see here. Okay, and just this is kind of a caveat a little bit with this, is that the goal is actually reflection and perhaps action. That's how we're defining this. Some other people may not see it this way, but really it's an intellectual game that's first and foremost. A lot of designers want action in the world, and we do too, and we encourage that. But the idea is that at the baseline, it's about reflection and the idea that we think first and we only act after we think. So we're affecting our perspective on certain things, and then we can take action later. So I've got 3 examples just for you to just quickly kind of address this. And this is like some historic examples here. So this is like back in 2001 by James Auger and Jimmy Lazo. And this is a concept tooth that receives a signal from your phone and then transmits the sound to, through bone conduction, in the body. So you don't need any speakers or headphones or anything. You just, from my phone to my tooth, and then I can hear all this. And so in their words, the audio tooth implant is a conceptual proposition intended to encourage discourse and comment on the possibilities of biotechnology and its potential impact on society and culture. So very, very, very discursive in that goal for that. And just as a little bit of side note, that what's interesting about this project, I think, is because here it made the cover of Time magazine as one of the coolest inventions of 2002, which is another kind of interesting story about this product, that it wasn't it was a completely speculative thing. It didn't exist. It was conceptual. In fact, this tooth is about this tall. It's not a small one at all. So it's they cast it, very large, and because they got a kind of a regular sized, sort of computer chip at that time, a computer chip, and put it in there. So, okay, but so here's another project, a little more recent. You might know Superflux. This is their kind of a drones project by then. It's called Drone Aviary, and in their words, the Drone Aviary is an investigation of the social, political, and cultural potential of drone technology as it enters civil space. So it's very much a cautionary vision that we've seen a lot of. And this is a while, kind of before drones were as common as they are right now, sort of thinking through the possibilities of that. And I just got a little short video I'll share with you on that. So this is from the drones, a drone's eye view of what you're seeing. And you're seeing the data that it's actually collecting. Yeah. So I don't know if you caught that very last bit. It identified those young males as statutory nuisances. And so anyway, so this is it sort of highlights the possibilities as well as the problems with technology and how it integrates into our built environment. This project also, and I'm picking examples that some of you may have actually heard of. So they're more popular examples. This one is the TBD catalog, and this is done by a team of designers that worked with, it was organized by the Near Future Laboratory, and it's kind of like this, a Sky Mall magazine, if you might know or remember that sort of high-tech catalog that often was on airplanes. So in this TBD catalog, TBD is to be determined. It has 66 farcical products, and our fictional products, and 62 farcical ads were included in this. So, so while the previous 2 projects had a more serious tone, this one approaches similar issues, but uses sort of humor and lighter forms like of satire. So let's see. Oh, here this. Oops. Oh, why is it not letting me? Oops. Oops. Let me see. I just moved my thing here.
Cloud computing. What is the near future of open source education? Will there be beer in the future? Beef jerky? What will stress us out? What sort of future exists for the humble ice cube? What kind of pests will need eradication? Will algorithms for finding love be better in the future? To answer that, we created a design fiction product catalog. It was not a means to predict the future. It was a means to suggest it, to imply it, to discuss it. By creating objects, the products and services that would be part of a possible near future world.
Okay, yeah, so at the end there, she talks about, it's a means to suggest, to imply, and discuss the future by creating products that would be a part of a near future world. So it's very much of, that's sort of the goal of this. So what we saw with those three examples were the first project at the time, and it was still called critical design. And the drone project is described by their designers as speculative design. And you heard the last one is a form of design fiction. And this is the kind of the rub with a kind of a younger discipline is this kind of overlap. And this is where we see discursive design, let me see, fitting that the idea that, where is it? Okay, yeah, there it is. That it's really an umbrella term, and this is one of the confusions about discursive design, is that all of these are all these all are a kind of a species underneath the genus of discursive design. And so this list can, continue to grow, and some of these may sort of die off. In fact, some of them actually have kind of died off. But that's how we're seeing discursive design, where critical design, design fiction, and speculative design are probably the three most common forms that are discussed and people talk about today. And so they're and these again could be subspecies. In fact, a lot of people think that design fiction is really a type of speculative design. So anyway, so this is all kind of getting figured out, getting solidified with some of this language and how we begin to think of it. And some designers don't really care where they kind of fit in all of these, if they're called speculative or whatever. So anyway, we use discursive design to kind of talk about this big broad number of species. Okay, so if this is sort of to retrace a little bit, so as a little bit of a conceptual model. So imagine this as being this, this space of design of, kind of professional design practice. And what we were doing is kind of looking at the four fields as a way to kind of make sense of the dominant motivations, working within that space. And we've come across discursive design, which is one of those four. And this had a kind of a certain history to it, and what we wanted to do is a kind of a project of expansion as well too. And this is that the not just for gallery anymore, as it we're thinking of discursive design itself as four different domains within discursive design, as it has been growing and expanding and has become a little messy too, in trying to understand that as well. So we're kind of, there's a little bit of fractal going on here. So those four domains, and I'm going to talk about each one of them, is our social engagement, applied research, basic research, and practical application. So two of these are research-based, two of them are more practice-based, and it's easiest to kind of show you some examples about them. So the first one is social engagement here. It's really the most prevalent way that discursive design has operated in, historically. And it's closest to forms of art in terms of how it's disseminated, and also, some of the final outcomes as well. And this can be kind of thought of as an activist mode. And the goal is to engage, society somehow. And usually the broader the messaging, the better, the broader the audience and messaging, the better. Okay, so some examples. So this one is called Epidermids. It's an interactive pet concept by Stuart Carton Design, and it was part of their Cautionary Visions concept series. And I mentioned too that the examples I'm going to show are are for more the commercial space, because a lot of because it's a little bit more different. There's, you know, like thousands of examples of this that operate in a little bit more of like as an independent designer doing this kind of work. But I think it's interesting to sort of expand the understanding by looking at how this is engaged in different types of marketplaces. So this is one that was actually done by a design firm in California. So it was intended to provide a speculative peek into a near future and kind of what to watch out for. So this is, in their words, a fully functioning organism resulting from advanced tissue engineering and the latest fuel cell and electronics technology. Epidermids, they don't feel pain or think, but they follow a complex set of algorithms. They require minimal maintenance and can be stored in a state of forced hibernation in a standard refrigerator, and are customizable with different body, skin, hair selections, and through tanning, tattooing, and piercing. So this project is, so it's like kind of like a living Tamagotchi in a way. So this project falls within the area of social engagement, but for branding purposes for the firm. And this has got a lot of press, and it's part of the permanent collection in the Museum of Modern Art. This is another example from that series. You know, imagine your child developing the foundational knowledge in literature, music, art, and science required at the best elementary program. So it's, you know, the idea that you just pop these glasses on and you're a good parent. So these are the kinds of projects that the Stewart Carton actually does as a commercial product design firm. So they have a serious tech clients, and they tend to focus on medical stuff. But it used discursive design as a way to establish itself as a thought leader in the industry. So it helps with the branding, attraction and retention of designers. And as mentioned, it gets a lot of press and coverage even beyond the trade. This project you might be familiar with. It's called Nature Pod, and this is a project led by Stuart Candy. He's a futurist that's really befriended design in a lot of ways. And he was teaching at the Ontario College of Art and Design, and this is a project he did with his students in this Strategic Foresight and Innovation program there. And this is what he considers a Guerrilla Futures Guerrilla Futures Ventures. So the project combines strategic foresight and media to produce provocative encounters in the real world as a way of suggesting alternative futures. So this project asks, you know, what if you could reap the health benefits of spending time in nature for productivity, creativity, and stress relief, even without leaving your office? So that's, you know, quote, what it was asking. So here's just again, a short clip from that about the project, about the engagement.
The concept of it's amazing.
I actually felt like I was in nature.
This is our lunch break, and I was like, we're spending 5 minutes.
Having this in the office would be definitely a good thing, for sure.
In my personal time, this is definitely something that I would love to see.
Relaxing. Interesting. I think it is a bit ironic that we have to resort to technology to immerse us in 10 minutes of nature.
I think it's a bit ridiculous. To me, this gives workplaces that don't want to spend that kind of effort an easy out.
Okay, so yeah, so this is a simple sort of digital interactive device in kind of, it's basically on an iPhone, kind of placed into a massage chair. And it was sponsored by Interface, which is a large global flooring, carpeting company that's very sustainability minded. And this was done in a trade show setting where they interviewed people kind of about what they thought of it. And so the booth was set up at Canada's largest architectural interiors trade show. And you can see that, you know, they all the students had, you know, had all the appearances of a legitimate product, but it wasn't. It was just this project, and it wasn't necessarily presented to the audience that way, which is why you got some of those different reactions from them. And so the goal was to get people to reflect on their relationship with nature and technology and the role of employers in health and well-being of their workers. So that's what it's about. And they used a little bit of deception in order to do that, which we maybe can talk about and sort of some of the ethics of some of that. So, and another example of the social engagement is, as we saw before, with the Museum of the Future, and obviously the museum is a well-known, format for social engagement. So this is a brief video on, I think, is it? There it is. Okay, so yeah, you saw that so throughout the exhibition, there are these questions that you might have noticed, such as like, would you augment your children to give them a better life? Would you let a machine take care of you? So this is institutional. It started out as a temporary museum, but it's been successful. And actually, I think 3 years ago, they actually had a just kind of a quite beautiful, or at least elaborate permanent building for the Museum of the Future. So the last example in this area I'll show is one, and this is a board game called Arranged by a Pakistani designer, Nishara Balagodwala. And this is done on Kickstarter and that platform. So I'll just play the clip of her video there.
Arranged is a board game that forces participants to confront the struggles of an arranged marriage. The culture of arranged marriages is still very prevalent in South Asian societies. Most girls are forced into marrying somebody their parents picked for them. These guys are chosen on the basis of their wealth and social class. Sometimes it's even a business deal. The girl's role in these marriages is just as superficial. Because of this, they have to present themselves as being the perfect bride at all times. And this causes them to use things such as skin whitening cream and diet. The girls are also too afraid to remove themselves from these situations because they're not educated enough to be able to provide for themselves or to live an independent life. I think the first step to fixing any problem is to acknowledging that it even exists, and then hoping that people will have a conversation. Arrange provides a platform for people to be able to discuss the issue that is present, and it does so in a very lighthearted setting.
Okay, so yeah, she said there at the end, hoping that people will have a conversation about it. And this game is providing a platform for people to be able to discuss the issue. So very much sort of in line with, social engagement with the issues that she's interested in. So if we look at those examples of the projects, they are all social engagement, but they have some connection to a marketplace and participation by kind of larger institutions. So not just independent designers. And then also we can see that the form that they take are different. We didn't talk about with the epidermis one. That was kind of a press release. That's how they did it. And then obviously we had a trade show, a museum, and a marketplace, all ways what we can get that kind of, or different context for that social engagement. So again, the idea is first on reflection, and then through then you can have conversations and actions and things like that. So okay, so the next one is applied research. So social engagement is probably the most common and dominant one that's out there, and so we're trying to sort of expand beyond the possibilities of that. That's how that's been practiced. So, and there has been a growth in this area, and I think largely because of master's programs and things like that, that there's been a growth in design research, applied research in this area. So with, let's say typical evaluation research, you might show a prototype to an audience, and you get ergonomic, aesthetic, or kind of usability feedback. But what discursive design is particularly good at is getting at what's hard, otherwise, is is people's values, their attitudes, their beliefs. So there's kind of a, sometimes people think of these as provocative probes or provocative prototyping. So this is kind of work. This is why I say it, even if you're not in the discursive space, maybe you're in other spaces where you can embed a discursive practice in the research process, with the goal being sort of a non-discursive, output. Like, and I'll show you an example just, of a commercial company that's doing this kind of work. So, and this is Philips Design, and this is their project is called Electronic Tattoo. So I'll just play a little bit of this. Okay, so you kind of get the idea that through touch, this the tattoo sort of emerges from through this touch. So basically they showed this video, made it available to the public, and they solicited feedback so they could make better, future products and better business decisions. So they weren't, Philips wasn't interested in subcutaneous addressable ink tattoos, but instead sort of the values of their consumers. And one of the things that they found was that they were kind of surprised that the consumers, the people that they were showing to, they weren't concerned with the safety of this thing. That they're putting this addressable ink into their body, but they were more concerned with the fact that corporations could like hack into their bodies. So they're more concerned about information security than they were safety, which was sort of interesting to them. And so this project, this is what the design director Clive Van Herden sort of said about this. This for us, this kind of learning was money in the bank, and understanding of a very, very strong, heartfelt anxiety that the consumers had. So this is another project that was part of that, just kind of a kitchen of the future type thing, same kind of approach. This project is called Future Libraries, and it was a project between the Camden Council in the UK and the design program at Central St. Martin's, London. So the Camden Council, they were slated to close 13 libraries because of funding cuts, but it occurred to them that that they could possibly use Central St. Martin's to help to attempt to save the libraries and learn a little bit more about what people wanted. So this kind of a last ditch effort to save the libraries. And the quote, the result of this Future Libraries project, where research staff and students worked with council officers and librarians to design and deliver creative interactions that engaged library users and other members of the public in sharing their visions for future libraries. And they sort of took along, a very typical design thinking process. And you can, see the gray divergence and convergence sort of diagrams there. And they had multiple iterations of this project. And this one is called the Future Library Bureau tool. And it was designed so it could pop up in places that non-library users might be found. So as opposed to, someone with a clipboard knocking on the door, asking about information, it was a different way to begin to engage with them. And sort of as an interactive tool that involves citizens in a story about rebuilding a library that had been burnt to the ground to hide evidence of a crime. So there's kind of a story around all of this, but it basically got people to engage and to reflect and to make. And through this project, actually, the designers and researchers were able to gain insights and formulate a report and successfully argue for the council to reverse their decision. So in a way, the discursive design actually saved these libraries. They were able to, they found that by closing them, they would lose certain things. And so they were able to shift some of the functions of the libraries themselves with this project. So I know Tobias Revel spoke to you last week, and so at a time he was with a group called Strange Telemetry, and this is a project that they did. And in quote, it's called Senescence, where they worked with members of the public to generate evidence for a government office of science foresight project that explored the challenges and opportunities of an aging society. This project marks the first active use of speculative design in UK government policy. And so what you can see here is they created these posters visualizing the future and showed them to the elderly. This is inside a robot repair shop, and it was actually modeled off of an existing sort of repair shop that was in the neighborhood of this elderly. And so there's some detail, but and there's also some ambiguity with some of the things there. And they intentionally did not include people in all of these scenes either. And so these were basically just tools to help facilitate a conversation that ultimately led to the government understanding better the values, attitudes, and beliefs of its elderly population. And so the outcome of this is Strange Telemetry helped produce, sort of 2 reports on their findings. And this is used for policy making. And this project, I know that I think a couple of weeks ago you had seen, and this would be kind of another example, sort of fit in this space. This is the output for Unreal Institutions. So, but if we look at those first 3 projects, we see done by a corporation, done by a university, done by a consultancy, an in-house team, part of an institutional contract, and then a government contract. Might be thought of as market research, generative research, and a form of ethnographic research. And producing a prototype, a co-creative tool, or sort of an information gathering tool. And one's film, the other one's sort of product design, one's graphic design. So we can see this sort of a breadth there. So social engagement and applied research, so they're the most common, and basic research is kind of a little bit more on the horizon. So basic research, as you might know, but I want to emphasize it, it's academic research, pure research, and it's where you produce knowledge and general principles without necessarily a specific mandate for application in the world. So the stuff that, kind of you see universities sort of maybe taking on most. And so this first way of doing basic research is really on and in service of discursive design itself. And this hasn't really happened very much, but now with more PhD students there, we're getting more of this where we're doing research to understand better discursive design itself. So it's just not being a tool, but we're having more insight and learning of that. And this is a project that was done by a student that I was working with, Ian Walden. He's from Falmouth University in Cornwall in the UK. And so he was taking a specific framework of discursive design and testing out. It was dealing with provocation. And so this was a kind of what you would call a research through design project, or practice-based research approach, where it's really looking at these principles of discursive design, but was making designed artifacts in order to do this. So I'm kind of looking forward to more things like this, but I'll play you what this project was dealing with the topic of end of life. If I can get this to there. Okay. Oops, shoot. Okay.
My name's Ian Walden, and I'm currently a PhD student at Falmouth University. My project is Mortem Stalls. It's a discursive artifact designed to generate discourse around a group of people who are over the age of 65, who don't necessarily have a life-limiting illness, but are tired of living, or they've had a fulfilled life and are ready to die. There is no legislation in law, there's no help for those people. I found a thread from a deaf lecturer called Naomi Richards, and she's an expert on old age rational suicide. And my mum had a stroke and was kept alive, essentially. It kind of spurred me on to create something that brought to the front the subject of how and when people die. Whilst I was looking at ways in which I could generate some output for the idea around oars, I thought that it would be great to just sell a shop that sold everything that people actually use. Part of discursive design is about provocation, but it's also about parody as well. And I'm really testing those levels of provocation.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's what his project and looking at specifically discursive design itself. But what's more common is sort of the second type of basic research. It's kind of related to basic research. It's really supporting other fields research, so not our own, not design zone. And a lot of this is done with public engagement with science or public engagement with science and technology. And this is where a basic researcher, kind of does the work in whatever their field in, and they partner with a discursive designer to help disseminate this work. So essentially it's like social engagement, but it's with work with other basic researchers from other disciplines. So Daisy Ginsburg is an example of this working, who's kind of well-known working kind of in this type. And this is, and grant agencies right now are looking for this sometimes with grants that we'll give you this grant to do this research, but you have to figure out how to translate this or get the public engaged in this topic. So there's more work that's sort of there's work that's being done in this area quite a bit. Okay, and so that's dissemination. But this is the other realm, and again, this is kind of more on the horizon, is when discursive design would be part of the actual research and planning protocols for other fields research. So for example, a psychologist is working on exploring a range of reaction to various forms of, social stimuli. They might actually employ a discursive designer doing provocative prototyping to help them to do that kind of work. So, and discursive design will kind of know that it's arrived when it's actually being written into some of these grants. So not just on the public engagement side, but the actually development of the research itself. Okay, so that's basic research. And the last one that I'll go through so we can get some questions is this area of practical application. So this is also on the horizon a little bit. And this is where there's an orientation towards practice and a distinct operative goal. So discursive design is usually, not about getting actual utility of the object. It's rhetorical, they make us think. But in this domain, the reflection is more practical and directly useful. So we can think of this maybe used in, therapy, counseling, coaching, public policy. In deliberative democracy, it could help inform constituents about possible outcomes prior to a vote. So you have discursive designs, and one will lead to outcome A, the other one would lead to outcome B to help kind of unpack some of the details of an issue that people might be voting on. So as an example, so this is looking back a little bit. And this is what could be considered an example of practical application, but also it's kind of worked in with some it's part research as well. So we're kind of using this as a potential example here. This is a news feed device. You can kind of see it's this sort of red thing that these nuns are looking at. And it was co-developed with nuns and placed in a visible location in their home. And quote, the nuns we worked with lived in a cloistered monastery, yet pray on behalf of people around them. The channels of information into their enclosure were narrow: Catholic newspapers, personal appeals, and carefully chosen radio broadcasts. We wanted, as the designers, to open them up to information from around the world to ensure that their prayers weren't biased towards any particular perspective or events. So this is a little bit of a close-up of that object, kind of looking down on it. So this is very much a tool for reflection, and they mentioned that it directly affects their prayers, and they used this for 5 years inside this cloister. So it's an intervention, and it approaches the issue in kind of an alternative, kind of boundary pushing way. Another project which possibly have seen, and this is the Euthanasia coaster. It was done actually in 2010, and it's a hypothetic death machine in the form of a roller coaster engineered to humanely, with elegance and euphoria, take the life of a human being. So again, in quotes, riding the coaster's track, the rider is subjected to a series of intense motion elements that induce various unique experiences, from euphoria to thrill to tunnel vision to loss of consciousness and eventually death. Thanks to the marriage of advanced cross-disciplinary research in aeronautics, space medicine, mechanical engineering, materials technology, and of course gravity, the fatal journey is made pleasing, elegant, and meaningful. So, so he did a lot of work, Julius Urbanus, on this, and it received a tremendous amount of press. There was people got tattoos with this coaster on them. Rock groups made songs about it. There was a short film made about it. It's really sort of an incredible impact that this did. But it was very much in the realm of social engagement. But the thought is, could this be used as a form of practical application? And so, like, could an end-of-life counselor use this project to help open up conversation about people's wishes and their fears about passing on? And I would just say I was involved in an end-of-life project, working with some neurologists and bioethicists on a similar type of project. There was another a woman who was working around the same issue as well, about getting people to think. So it's kind of a natural fit, because one of the things with discursive design, all the times there's dissonance, there's kind of a strange familiarity, and one of the projects we did with the outcome was sort of played with these different talk tools that took different recognizable forms already, and then sort of it started to rethink them a little bit. So anyway, that's practical application. And the question is, how can discursive design be not just used for social engagement? So it's not necessarily research, though it could contribute to that. But much more as a direct tool for accomplishing something. So like an instrumental reflection. So in a way, discursive design is like this intellectual thing, but it's kind of been this recursive process where it's actually become something practical again. So those are the 4 domains, and that are kind of possible, and I think might be relevant to some of the research that you're doing there at Simon Fraser, and how you might begin to use this kind of work, kind of no matter what you're working on. Again, if you're engaging with individuals. So with that, I thank you, and we can address some questions. Some of the questions that these are the ones that I was sent right before. So I don't know if people have other questions. I don't know who submitted these, or but I'll let kind of Sam take it over in terms of, like, if there's some from the audience right now, or if we should address some of these briefly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If anyone in the room has a question, or if you're online and would like to ask a question, if you'd like to raise your hand or just post it directly in the chat. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, shall we start with some of the questions that were submitted in advance?
Okay, yeah, sure. So if looking at the first one, so how do you address conflicting feedback from diverse stakeholders when engaged in a project that incorporates discursive or provocative elements? And I would say the same way if you were dealing with ones that weren't discursive or provocative. I mean, this is something that design researchers are kind of faced with all the time, is dealing with conflicting feedback. Like a more scientific way to do this, which is not always the designerly way approach, is you basically talk to more people, and can you get is there the kind of a majority view on something? Like, do you have a representative sample or not? And it very well could be that you have conflicting issues, so your solution may have to deal with 2 constituencies that feel very differently about something. So I don't see this question as that as particularly related to discursive design. For me, it's largely a design research question and problem that's very that can be very typical. So I don't know if I was interpreting it correctly or not, but that's kind of the way that I see that. So we can loop back to that if we want to. The next one is, have there been instances in your professional experience where your work has generated controversy or initiated unforeseen discussions? How did you manage those situations? So I think the clear example for this for us is we designed very early on. It's very much in the kind of a critical design kind of space. Is we designed this we called the umbrellas for the civil but discontent man. So playing on Freud's civilization and its discontents, these series of umbrellas that sort of allowed some, they had basically combining the symbol of these different sword handles and these umbrellas and these sort of full-length black umbrellas that were intended to kind of play with this tension that Freud talks about and about civilization. It's in its discontent. So I'm living in social society. I need to be civilized, but so then I have to keep these other feelings is sort of in check. So it was a project that was very much about that. So as an experiment, this is when we were looking at how to go from what are the implications of a product or a discursive product that we were intending actually kind of for the gallery into the marketplace. And so we ended up licensing the series of umbrellas to a company, and they sold thousands and thousands of them, and they were associated. There were like a whole host of issues that came up with. There was one college campus where a SWAT team was called out because someone had one of these and it looked like a real weapon. There was a mall that had a SWAT team. There was in the UK, there was a train that was shut down. So all these implications that had over this product, which we thought we'd never even expected. For us, it was so obvious that these were just these were umbrellas and they weren't real swords, but that was kind of overlooked. So that created some definite ethical issues. And were we to do it again, we wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have done that project in that way. We would have left it in the gallery, in that safer space in the gallery. It certainly wouldn't have the breadth of exposure and effect, and we would have been able to kind of control that messaging. Again, once you kind of you lose a little control of it, you lose control of your messaging. Because the project came, for us, it was about, this civilization and its discontents. And it turned to be, it was incredibly discursive because I was on a news show, about this because they had another issue and they ended up talking to the designer about it. So it had incredible breadth. But the discourse had shifted from kind of a post 9/11 space where people were uncomfortable, and rather than this sort of civilization and its discontent something. So it was very much for the user, and it turned to be a discourse kind of about how other people feel safe and can interpret these certain things. So that's an example.
How culture polices our discontents.
Yes.
They need to be absented. We can't actually say them or perform them.
Yeah.
That's what I get from what happened.
Yeah. And there is, we actually wrote about this. I think it might be chapter, I think it's maybe the last chapter of the book. We talk about this as a case study, just because it's kind of interesting to see some of the details of this. So. But yeah, it is and this is what also came up when I was working with the end of life project with the two neurologists and the bioethicist. I wanted to be much more provocative with the work that we were doing, and they were very uncomfortable with that. And so we ended up tempering down the work that we did a lot. And so that's one of kind of the interest I have, and that's why Ian Walden's project with End of Life to me is so interesting, because we're beginning to look at what are the limitations, under what context, how much, because there's an advantage to using the provocation to get people to aware and notice and not glaze over an issue, and potentially push some buttons, but like what buttons are getting pushed, and it's too much for some people. So those questions are really important, ethical, especially when you're dealing with dissonance and bits of provocation. So as a discipline, I'm glad to see that we're working towards some of those, to kind of address some of those issues, because it is an obvious ethical thing, because you can and even practical, right? Because if you push too far, then you're not going to have an effect, and you could actually have a negative effect on the issue that you're concerned with. It actually could take people who could, maybe if you're looking from an activist perspective, people who might be wanting to come to your side or willing or possible to come to your side, and completely turn them away and turn them off. So getting that nuance is both ethical and sort of there's a practical effectiveness aspect to that as well.
I guess I'm really interested in this because I think the work is I think it's very strong, and the thing with researchers and scientists, they're trained very early where the line is between their outcomes and also what cannot be discussed. So this is a kind of a training. At the same time, it is a kind of policing. And so the policing of what we can talk about and cannot talk about, I think that's really interesting line. And the gallery ends up really, okay, on one level, the gallery ends up being a space where you can do this. Because the gallery has been a space where it's intended to be unreal. Like what I want to say is so that the audience, the people at all, can go, oh, that's just art. So I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's very, very interesting how controlled we are in our culture, in our social environments. And if you, and with that, I mean, I don't know if it's idealism, but really just like wanting to kind of like create this, that there are a lot of invisible lines that we will find out about when we put into alternative spaces. Those invisible lines and they're going to come running with security guards are going to show you where those invisible lines are.
Yeah, actually, the issue of art versus design is actually really important. That so Dunn and Raby were probably the progenitors of critical design and even speculative design. So they're really, any academic work in this area, references them. And one of the things when they started doing this work, they were posed with this question: well, what you're doing, isn't it just art? And they were, in fact, I saw them at the Industrial Design Society of America. They were giving a presentation early in the early 2000s, and they were kind of almost like laughed off the stage. Like, what are these artists doing at our design conference? And so, but they're very vehement about that this is design work, not artwork. And it's because of that issue of being able to dismiss it. If it's perceived as design, then it is of the everyday, and there are kind of design logics, like someone had to think about this, and and there's people behind it to get this in a marketplace, and so there are these kind of design logics that aren't necessarily there with art. So the idea of design being of the everyday and art transcending the everyday, you could get a little bit more impact. It was sort of easier to disregard it as art. And that's why what's interesting with discursive design in a gallery setting, in that safe art gallery, it's really interesting because you're kind of mixing the art and design there, but it does seem to be a pretty safe place. But there is a little bit of a movement to basically get out of the gallery and just like, I guess, like what you have too with the critical and the post-critical.
And the Mortem Post, that was really interesting because it looked like it was in a public space. I don't know if it was that in a public space. The Mortem Post.
Oh, more. Oh, yeah. That's a very interesting story because that was actually, it was presented. He wants it to be in a public space. It was part of an exhibition at for a conference on end of life, and he had incredible pushback from the university because they were worried about how sensitive the topic was. And so he had to present his, it had to be behind locked doors, and only people, they had to sign a waiver, and only one person at a time could be there, and he had to be there with them to, for this whole thing. But his imagining for this is really to get it out sort of in more of a public space, and in some of the ways that the Nature Pod project was. It was kind of a speculative project in sort of a, kind of a real world environment to get people to engage in anything way.
In the discursive way, because really what's going on, one person at a time behind locked doors, don't change the way you're thinking.
Yeah, it was really, it was extremely frustrating for him, the pushback that he had gotten from the university on his project.
It's really interesting. Thank you. Really interesting.
So
I don't know any solutions at all. I just like feel like, whoa, it's quite striking.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's work on this other question on, I skipped that one. Do you believe discursive design should always be context specific, or can it also be impactful in more universal settings? I mean, there's this tension that you usually have with, like, especially with social engagement, where you're trying to, it's kind of the scattershot method, right? You're trying to get, affect as many people or get as many people exposed as you can. And there's advantages to that, because you could potentially, like with the euthanasia coaster, you could really have a big impact. But it doesn't happen a lot. And I think that with a context specific, that you have better odds. You have a smaller potential audience, but you can dial in. It's a kind of if we can think in marketing terms, it's more effective with this sort of niche marketing, because you kind of know the perspectives and those lines. One of the ways when you go to these universal settings, then you're kind of accounting for these different levels of sensitivities and fundamentally different interests. So if you go context specific, you can dial in your messaging, and what I think that ultimately you're going to be more effective. It's a little like giving a speech, right? I'm gonna give it a talk. Do I know the audience, and I can be more tuned and sensitive to that audience versus I'm just, I've got something out there that's sort of, I'm speaking to everyone. So while certainly you can do, and a lot of people have sort of tried that with universal settings, I do think it's you're going to be more effective with context specific and have different kinds of successes. So I usually suggest students to get more focused about who is their audience, what is the public that they want to that they want to engage, and then they can be more specific and potentially effective, and potentially there and engage them with the audience, not just have it be out and then like I put it online, and and that's also some of the same criticisms that art gets as well, again with the critical and post-critical with art. The next question, I'd have to get back to you. Nothing's coming to mind right now with climate change, but I'm sure there are like dozens and dozens and dozens of projects. I've had small student projects or students do projects on climate change, but I have to look for a good example of that. Nothing's coming to mind right away.
Can I draw your attention to a question in the chat?
Yeah.
So someone is interested, branching slightly off the direction of your talk, but they're interested in your experience of working with the Amish community, and are curious to know if there's a thread that runs through that into your design practice, and how that experience shaped you.
Okay. Yeah. So I worked. So I left industrial design, left Pratt, and a little. I was left kind of wanting at this time at that institution. This was 1996 is when I graduated. And there wasn't a lot of design research necessarily. It was, and again, in this context, you know, Pratt, that, you know, is a bunch of designers sitting around the table deciding what people want, and we don't even know who these people are and how do we know what they want or not. So I had this kind of hankering for understanding more about specifically the social, like what impact does the social have? And that's why I ended up with anthropology. And with anthropology, I was kind of interested in, my thesis at Pratt was product and the soul. I was looking at ways in which products can affect us at a deeper level. And so I was looking for ways through anthropology, sociocultural anthropology, to address that. And the Amish were one group, and because of the Amish that we're looking at, they had a shift in material culture. They had certain religious, moral, ethical values, and I was wondering how that translated into the value they see in physical stuff. And what was particularly interesting at the time with this Amish in this area is that they had greater disposable income because they were working in factories. So it's harder to make money doing farming because they're competing with large agribusiness and things like that. And so a lot of them turned to factory work. And because of that, they had greater exposure to the kinds of products that I use. They had greater disposable income, and they also had more leisure time. Rather than being a farmer, they would work, maybe they worked on piece rate largely. So they may only work like 7 hours a day. So anyway, it had an effect on their culture. So that's sort of so I was looking at these changes in material culture and consumption, largely to kind of understand what's the role of objects in society. But what led me to that is this kind of deeper meaning. Like I said, my thesis was about product and the soul. And so I think that discursive design is related in that way of kind of looking for alternatives beyond the kind of a commercial perspective on these other values that you might get from objects, and in a way sort of not value that you get from objects, but also then value that you as the object producer can get. Like in a way, it expands the role of designer beyond I'm just making things as the handmaiden of industry, and I'm able to participate in society and have a voice in ways that I traditionally don't do that. And that's kind of the typical when we think about critical design and that kind of in that type of activist mode, it's a way to use design in that kind of same way. So there's some link there between the two, but I haven't necessarily taken my my research on the production of value, production and consumption of value with the Amish, and then kind of brought that into discursive design. I don't know how open they would be to some more provocative work.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was an incredibly insightful talk. There was another comment in the chat that also just thanked you for kind of bringing words to their design practice, and also what the type of projects that they've been interested in and been inspired by. So yeah, I think that comment to me speaks for all of us. So thank you for this super insightful talk.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. Feel free to there's my email address. Feel free to contact me. I'm interested in work that PhD students are doing in this area too. And yeah, want to help evangelize this type of work and to get designers to have different experiences with what they're doing. So
thank you.
So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.